Did you know that the ANC fought for the freedom of the South African people, not knowing what South Africa actually is?
Yeah, well, it's not that they didn't know what South Africa is. Now that they defeated the racist apartheid regime, they just gave up on borders. Yeah, this is actually a genuine story.
Yeah, and for those who might be slightly confused, here is the Minister of Home Affairs explaining exactly what happened.
Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi admits post-94, leaders didn't think it necessary to manage the borders.
Before 1994 democratic elections, the borders were a fortress because there was war between South Africa and freedom fighters. But after the elections, it was thought that everything is over, and we never had a structure that manages our borders, which means they were not managed. But then when it was realized about 10 years ago, Parliament started enacting an act to establish a border management authority.
So as you can see, Byron, they just didn't think the borders were important because, what is a nation without borders? I just cannot believe that a government in 2023 is the government of a country called South Africa who are thinking to themselves, borders don't really matter. If that's the case, then what are you the government of? Without a border, you're not a state, you're just a geographical area.
I suppose there is a degree of merit in it. So what he actually says is that because of the border war, they gave up on the borders because, as I said, that was racist, right? But in doing that, what the ANC actually shows itself as doing is it is a liberation party that struggled for the liberation, right? But it actually never had any idea on how to govern once liberation was achieved. Now here they've got their liberation, but they're incapable of governing. And this is exactly something we've seen up and down the country. So the border situation shouldn't actually be that surprising. They got rid of the borders because of the liberation struggle, right? Because the borders were racist because of everything that went before. But what they didn't really stop to think about is now that in the new era, the apartheid regime is gone, they need to actually manage the place. That means you have to manage your borders because you actually need borders for a reason. And that's because of the sovereignty of your state and the nationality of your state. You need to keep South African. So it's another example of the ANC being incapable of moving from liberation party to governing party.
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on. And just think about the entire mess created by having borderless South Africa. How many of our resources get trafficked over the border through Zamazamas? Plenty. The Zamazamas themselves are from Lesotho predominantly. A lot of smugglers and drug dealers and sex traffickers are not from South Africa either. So the consequences of not thinking that a border matters impacts directly on the crime prevalent in South Africa at the moment. And for them to not make that connection in 28 years is just mystifying. Well, it's not mystifying because, as you explained quite well, these people are just utterly incapable of governing anything.
The worst thing that South Africa actually gets from its, should we call them unofficial neighbors, is probably Zimbabwean news analysis, which we've seen all over Twitter. I mean, those guys are terrible, man. Did a whole video on them. I mean, if only we could export them, we would have such a better country, mate. If all the Zimbabwean news analysts who want to comment on South African news could just go home, South Africa would be great. But, jokes aside, actually the biggest problem that South Africa has is that what the ANC had to do is actually have a developmental state. So that basically means they needed to grow the prosperity in the job market in South Africa so that it can cater for the economic sectors that were previously disadvantaged, right? So basically they need to incorporate the black people into the economy. It doesn't help when you take an existing problem and then add 15 million illegal immigrants that aren't meant to be here in the first place and say, now we somehow got to figure out what to do with these guys as well. Because you've already got an existing problem, which you need to figure out, plus you've made it even more difficult. You basically put it onto hard mode. Like, why would you do that? And what we're seeing now in modern South Africa is the consequences of that. Had we actually protected the border in the first place, we would have just maintained the existing population, got jobs for them, potentially just renovated the country in order to incorporate these individuals into the economy. But that's not possible anymore. Instead, now we've got rampant crime because of mass immigration. Facilities are overstretched. The hospitals are being overstretched. Crime, corruption, theft, looting of places. A lot of it actually is due to mass illegal immigration. because these guys don't exactly come here with passports and visas, which means can't exactly get a legitimate job, can they?
But the ANC now has a plan. They understand that a border exists and that we should, control it in some way. So for the first time, after who knows how many years in power, they've got legislation now that says we're going to have border guards and they're going to have the powers of the SAPs. So they're going to have the powers to arrest people and things like that. I mean, I'm sorry to say, but I think this was developed in 600 AD, like in France, where you sort of, have a geographical area that's yours and you just defend it from people who don't belong there. I mean, I'm glad the ANC is catching up in 2023, but really, it's not a problem we should have had in the first place.
I only got one solution for this, mate, and that is, I honestly believe South Africa needs to go back to a monarchy, mate, because let me tell you what, like with an actual king of this land, the king would not allow his land to be invaded by foreign forces.
But for all those people who, those conspiracy theorists who say, actually the degradation of the state is done on purpose. No. We've just
They just forgot about it.
Illiterate morons in charge for 28 years. Like, that is the be-all and end-all. Don't let these people dictate how you live your life, please. They are just illiterate morons.
It's a grand irony. We see this actually in politics all the time, especially when we talk to the people that we talk to. Like, a lot of the times we can also think, oh, it's planned. Oh, yeah, look at the plans. And the more you talk to people, the more you realize there are no fucking plans in this place. Everything's just an accident of circumstance. And what you really realize is it's just the blind leading the blind and the stupid leading the stupid. Like, there's no plan here, mate. This is just welcome to Africa, mate.